Getting a preview of next year's winter leadership experience with Ohio Farm Bureau's Young Ag Professionals coming up in Columbus, January 26th and 27th. This annual event, really a chance to enhance your leadership experience while building personal and professional skills through Ohio Farm Bureau's Young Ag Professionals. Regenerative agriculture being talked about more and more across the country. One of the culprits to having this conversation build more and more is joining us on the podcast, Mitchell Hora, seventh generation Iowa farmer and soil health advocate. Mitchell, always great to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. Excited to chat here, and yeah, excited for going out to Columbus here in another couple weeks.
We were talking shop before we got on here about yields, and he was complaining about his awful Iowa yields, and I told him we'd take those in Ohio in a heartbeat. But I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself and your farm and your background before we get into what you're going to be talking about with our young.
Yeah, you bet. I'm seventh generation on my family's farm. I've got a 2-year-old daughter and a 5-month-old son. They're part of the 8th generation. We're about 700 acres. Nothing too crazy. 700 acres row crop here in southeast Iowa. Mostly corn, soybeans, but we've been growing a lot of cereal rye as well, and growing that for cover crop seed. Harvesting the rye. We've tried some other stuff in the last couple of years as well, wheat and barley and mustard and food grade corn, but for the most part, keep to the basics. But we do it all with no-till. We've been using no-till since 1978, and everything is in cover crops as well, mostly cereal rye, when we've been using cover crops since 2013. And the reason for doing those things is just building up our soil health, getting the biology to be the core driver of our resiliency and of our profitability. And, with being diligent with these practices, we've really been able to build up our soil health, build up our soil function, and decrease our need for input. So yeah, when my yields are less than I want them to be, like they were this year because of lack of rain, we're still able to be profitable, keep farming next year, especially as a 700 acre operation. We got to be competitive, and we got to really maximize every acre. And by building up our soil health and getting creative, we've really been able to do that.
Is the idea around soil health and the way you do it now something that you brought to the farm when you came back?
Nope. So dad was part of it back in 1978 when they were working on, doing no-till corn. When dad came back from Iowa State in the mid 80s is when they started doing no-till soybeans. We've never tilled ahead of a soybean planting since 1985. Like, wow. There's been some times where we'll till ahead of corn and stuff back, through the transition, but ahead of soybeans, never tilled ahead of soybeans since 1985. And so dad was a big part of that, really pushing for high yield soybeans back in the 80s and 90s. They're really able to see that, hey, this no-till thing can work. And now I think on the corn piece, seeing that no-till on corn can really work when you have it in conjunction with a cover crop. Because, of the tillage to prepare the seed bed, you've got to still prepare the seed bed, though, and be able to make sure you've got that soil where you can actually get a planter into it. And having living roots and the earthworm activity and good soil health, it enables that soil health to be at the level that we want. So I'm able to see that really pay off. But no, I've brought some crazy ideas back to the farm, like relay cropping, 60-inch corn, growing some of these different crops, like I said, mustard, wheat, malt, barley, food grade, open pollinated corn, trying all that stuff. And now the new, and then a lot of the data, the Haney testing stuff. Dad's been soil sampling since the 90s, but the Haney test has really been able to take us to the next level. And now the big thing I'm bringing is our carbon intensity scores and being able to show what our farm's carbon footprint is. And looks like there could be some significant dollars that we could tap into for the work that my family's been doing for decades.
Can't imagine how important this conversation is with younger farmers. I mean, look, they're getting into a business where land prices are, especially where you're at in Ohio too. I mean, they're enormously high right now.
Yeah.
Input costs are much higher than they were just 5 years ago. Everything it takes to grow a crop is significantly more expensive. So when these young people get involved, yield is one thing, but cost savings is another in order to make that bottom line work. So that part of the conversation has to be really key when it comes to young ag professionals.
That's right. And I'm a young farmer myself. I'm 29 years old. I'm on my local Washington County, Iowa Farm Bureau board and, involved in Farm Bureau here in Iowa. I think, being able to capture that low cost of production and be resilient, I think that's, of course, important, especially as young producers. But where my went to is what we're going to continue to deal with our entire lives is data, transparency, sustainability, environmental outcomes. Like the writing is on the wall, folks. Like this stuff is not going away. Whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter. You're going to be asked for data. You're going to be asked for what is your carbon intensity? What is your carbon footprint? What do you use for tillage, for cover crop, for fertilizer? How much diesel fuel do you burn? Like those things are going to be asked, and you're going to be required to deliver some of that stuff over throughout time. Like I'm just sold that that is already happening, and it's not going to go away. That transparency and showing what our impact is on that next player's supply chain and in their reports, that's why they're doing this. So we are part of the next folks down the supply chain. We're part of their scope 3 carbon footprint. And in order for them to improve their reporting and their data and their figures, they need to know more data from us. And if we want to work with them, we're going to have to supply part of that data. And but data is not free. We shouldn't give it to them for free because they're able to utilize it to market and to meet their stakeholder goals and their shareholder demands. We have a cost in collecting that data, and they should incur, or share in that because we're helping them with marketing and meeting their goals. So seeing a lot of opportunity for that. And we'll dig into that a bunch when I'm there in Columbus here in a couple of weeks.
That word data, boy, does it scare a lot of farmers. And I have to imagine it varies based on generation. And I'm just generalizing here, but
sure.
I know my grandpa would have said, you're getting this data over my dead body. And my dad would have said, there is no way in heck you're going to be getting that sort of information from me. Do you find that your generation is a little more open to the idea of sharing that data?
I think so, but I think it ends up being, what are you going to pay me for it? So on average, right now, just collecting farm data costs about $20 an acre. But then you've got that GPS and the additional like equipment and stuff to collect that. Maybe you're working with an agronomist or software platform. Like this stuff adds up. And then the practices that we're implementing that make the data valuable, like the cover crop or like the practices that go into your carbon intensity score, those practices cost money. And so that data and the practices behind it are really valuable. What we're looking at here right now is some of these low carbon biofuel tax credits, namely the 45Z tax credit. I'll talk about it a bunch when I'm out there. Basically, there's tax credits for biofuel manufacturers to lower their carbon footprint. And today, the crops that we grow, our corn and soybeans, they equate to more than 50% of the carbon footprint of those biofuels today. It's part of their scope 3 carbon footprint coming from their supply chain. So we're a major driver of the carbon footprint of that biofuel, just like we are for pork. For example, corn is about 65% of the carbon footprint of a pound of pork. Huge. And if they want to lower if the next folks in our supply chain, if they want to lower their footprint, they can purchase low carbon grain to get it done. We need to be able to supply them with that data, but we need to understand what's in it for them. Are they getting tax credits like 45Z? Are they getting some kind of a premium, in the supply chain? We need to know how the math works, and so that we can share in it, so that we can say, hey, I'm bringing you value. You're able to monetize this. What I'm doing is good, or good enough to help them to tell the story that they want to tell, and we need to be able to participate in that business model. So on 45Z, we're talking real numbers. I won't spill the beans here. People got to come and got to see for themselves. But huge financial opportunity. But we've got to have volume of folks that are participating, because we're talking about weighted averages here. We're talking about empowering a supply chain to decarbonize. And it's going to take volume. It's going to take all of us. So that's why I'm excited to come and continue to share our story and educate people about what's going on in the supply chain, and show you how you can tap into some of these dollars as well.
A great conversation about where the industry is going. Mitchell Hora going to make sure that our young ag professionals are there to meet the industry where it is in 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. A 7th generation Iowa farmer and soil health advocate. Looking forward to seeing you January 26th and 27th here in Columbus, the Young Ag Professionals Winter Leadership Experience. You can find out more about it and get registered online at experienceyap.com. Mitchell, thank you.
Awesome stuff. Looking forward to seeing everyone soon.
Since 1919, Ohio Farm Bureau has been working for you, advocating for farm families, for Ohio agriculture, and our local communities. From the State House in Columbus, all the way to Washington, D.C., Ohio Farm Bureau is feeding your need for new ideas. As we look towards the future and the changes coming along with it, one thing will never change: our mission. Working together for Ohio farmers to advance agriculture and strengthen our communities. Learn more and become a member today at ohiofarmbureau.org.
Find out how Nationwide Agribusiness can help you grow your business. Get to know the people with the experience and knowledge to help you. Whether you are looking to protect your farm or ranch from the ground up, or need someone who understands your changing commercial ag needs. Find out how to better manage the risks of your ag business, or how quickly you can get back to business. Learn how you can protect your next with Nationwide on your side.
At the Outlook and Policy meeting with Ohio State's Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics, Dr. Katchova joining us. She focused her talks today on farm income. And Dr. Katchova, what does farm income in that picture look like for 2023?
So thank you very much for having me here. So the projections that we have on farm income are coming from the USDA farm income forecast and for 2023. And what we are expected to see is the highest declines in farm incomes, both in net farm income and net cash income for this year. We're looking at declines of 23 to 27% for this year. And these are going to be the highest declines ever in the history. So in terms of nominal terms, in terms of real terms, these declines would be the third largest in history. So again, pretty much steep reductions and declines in farm incomes are expected for 2023. Now, the reasons are we would be looking at the components: the cash receipts, the production expenses, and the government payments. So lower cash receipts are expected both for crops and livestock, and then we are expecting to see lower government payments coming again from historical high 3 years ago, and then higher production expenses, as we see high production expenses every year. So all three components of farm income would contribute to declines in farm incomes for this year.
Some of those numbers seem staggering, but as you mentioned, you look over a longer, maybe 20-year average, kind of makes sense. We've seen some pretty high numbers here over the last several years. Speaking of high numbers, we're seeing yield records, or some of the highest yields that we've seen in the Buckeye State for some time. So again, those numbers, when they all put them together, could seem pretty staggering. You also look, though, when you look at farm income, at other factors, including farmland values. What did you find as far as that data is concerned?
So the farm incomes, then we can look at the balance sheet of the farm sector, and the balance sheet on the asset side, farmland is the biggest component of it, comprising of about 83%. And what we have seen on the land values is the strongest growth we have seen in a while in the last 3 years. So we have seen tremendous amount of improvements and increases in land values. So for the US and Ohio, somewhere in the percent of a little bit higher than 8% for this year. And so land values are very, very strong, and cash rents have also increased in the last 3 years. Not as much here in Ohio, not as much as land values, but they have increased in the last year. Now, the thing that is on everyone's minds this year is interest rates, because as interest rates are increasing, then we expect to see a little bit of a slower demand for farmland, and that will moderate the increase in land values that we're seeing.
Using the word moderate and decline quite a bit when you have these discussions, and it comes at a time where we're talking about the 2023 Farm Bill, which may now, it looks like, be the 2024 Farm Bill. Why is it important that this conversation happens now and the timing of the Farm Bill happens now as well?
Well, it's important because as I talked about farm incomes, a component of farm income is government payments. And in 2020 we had very high government payments, and they were due both to the coronavirus payments, the CFAP payments. We had payments related to the trade wars as well. And so, but we have seen decline in them in the last 3 years, because as the market took off and then commodity receipts have been very, very strong in the last 3 years, there was not a lot of need for government payments. But the situation is turning this year when we are expecting to see lower overall farm incomes. And we're seeing again government payments that are being very low. So this is a good time to talk about the Farm Bill, just because every time we see reduction in farm incomes, everyone is thinking about what is the long-term trend. Looking at the USDA baseline projections, the 10-year projections going into the future, we're expecting to see more of this in the future, kind of softening in the farm income, mostly following the trends in softening in the commodity prices. And so again, this is a good time to talk about the new Farm Bill because we need to talk about supporting the farm incomes.
You mentioned interest rates, and that's always a topic that's very interesting to discuss amongst a crowd like this. You have some people that are in their 20s or 30s and haven't seen interest rates quite this high as we're seeing now, 8%. Then you had some questions from the audience from farmers who've been around a while. And when I say a while, I say they saw what happened in the mid-'80s when we saw interest rates 22, 23, 25%. Can you talk about that a little bit and maybe how you responded to that question of why you call 8% pretty high interest rates compared to what we've seen over the past 10 years?
Mm-hmm. So again, that was a very good question coming from the audience. In terms of interest rates of 8%, the last time we saw these interest rates was during the financial crisis of 2007-2008. That is 15 years ago. So we haven't seen interest rates that high in a while. But now, this is a very important policy instrument of the Fed in order to control and tame the inflation. So interest rates have been rising, and we are seeing them kind of rising since March of 2022. Again, are they very high? Well, they are as high as they were 15 years ago, so therefore they're high. They're not as high as the ones that we've had in the 80s. But those are exceptionally high rates in the 80s that historically we almost have never seen them in other time periods. So again, we're going into what is probably kind of normal in long term, but we haven't seen it in a while. And that's why a lot of farmers and ag stakeholders, this is the number one concern on their minds. What do we do now that we are in an era of rising interest rates?
No doubt if we saw today what we saw in the mid-'80s, this picture would look a whole lot different for agriculture here in Ohio and across the U.S. Dr. Ani Katchova joining us from The Ohio State University, talking about farm income on the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.